touch anything, just pop that in your pocket.
Just pop that in my jacket pocket or clip it on my belt.
Either way.
I'll clip it on my belt, I think, because my pockets are just about full. And that way I can hide it, see.
Yes.
And the microphone's in the right place?
Yes.
Right. Okay, do you want to test it now, or? Testing 1, 2, 3. Perfect. So you'll turn it off. Can I talk, or do I have to stop talking now?
No, you can turn you down.
You've turned me down. Thank you. Okay, that's good. It's worth it. Now that you've turned up, it's worth putting on the program. Oh, yeah. Hi.
Get ready, Ron. I'll bring everybody in.
Yep. Yep.
The shepherd.
Quite a small number today, isn't it?
Well, I actually think, given the conditions that we have, this is actually about as good as going to get. Really.
I think it is. I think you're absolutely right. I do agree with that.
There are people who won't come unless you offer them $1,000.
No, I appreciate. I'm hot to trot.
Okay,
I
everybody,
will at the
hello.
moment, but not during the program. I'm fine. Thank you for the offer.
Okay, well, I'll leave it.
Okay.
Welcome to CPS. 2nd of February today. I was speaking to somebody this afternoon who, when I said that I was emceeing this, said that I needed to come in costume because today is the 2nd of the 2nd, 2022. So apparently it's International Tutu Day, and it was suggested that I come along in tutu. You'll be pleased to know that I didn't. So before we start, have we got any guests here tonight? Or anybody we haven't seen for a while? They're in for a special treat. If there are some guests, welcome. Welcome to everybody. Tonight's going to be a special night and something really worth looking forward to. Quick health and safety reminder, it's exactly the same as it is every other time. If anything happens in here, the main doors to go out are there and there. Remember that the door that gets back out onto the car park we've left locked for COVID reasons. So the primary way to come in is out the front, toilets, etc. are out that way. So just a reminder of that. Let's start with John to talk a little bit about the NPC.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the response we got to, there's a light shining in my eye, thank you to everybody for the response we got for the last MDC, closed on 31st of January. We ended up with 28 entries, so that was a good start for the year. I think the highest number we had last year was 37, so we'll aim for that a little bit later on, like next month, this month. Now, talking about this month, we need to determine what theme, subject, topic that we have to amuse ourselves with for the next 28 days, 26 days or whatever it is. So if I can get our president, Mr. Ian, to give me a number between 1 and 7, please, Ian. 6. And then we want a number between 1 and 30. 27 says, might be a good one this time, time it right. Time it right. Time is spelled T-I-M-E. Challenge your imagination. Time it right.
Thank you very much, John. Really interesting up here to see the thought bubbles starting to float around as everybody starts to think about time it right. Okay, that's one way to get started. JK, can you come and talk to us a little bit about the trophies that we're still trying our hardest to give away?
I still have some trophies here to be claimed from last year, and is Richard Food yet tonight? No. And Lamb?
No.
Jeff Trotter? Peter Dunbar? No.
We tried really hard. We'll have to find another way to get these prizes to people. Okay, before we kick off the program tonight, I just want to have a little bit of an update about where we stand with COVID, and it's a little bit of a projecting into nowhere land, to be quite honest. The rules, basically the discussions we've had with the RCC is they're quite happy for us to provided we're following the rules, we can operate here with less than 100 people in red conditions, which is where we stand at the moment. We all think that it's pretty likely in a couple of weeks, a month maybe, the world's going to tip upside down a little bit, and the numbers are going to be right up a little higher. At that point, we still expect to be able to operate under red conditions. However, we want to add a couple of levels of extra security to that, and we're going to start from next week in that purpose. What we're going to do is we're going to get a specific sign-in, when you come and sign in code for CPS, so that in the situation if somebody's here and doesn't realise that they've been exposed and subsequently comes up with a positive test, we will then be alerted to everybody at CPS that that's happened, so we'll be able to manage the CPS side of things. So what we'll have is a sort of A-frame board out the front that'll have both the RCC scan in and it'll have the CPS scan in. So I'll ask you from next week to scan in twice. That provides the RCC with the same feedback of people using their facility, and they've asked that we do that, and that makes perfectly good sense. But we've decided to go ahead with another level of security, and so that we can actually manage things within CPS. So from next week, once again, please come in the front door, present your vaccine pass, but scan, but not once, do it twice, so that you're in two places at the same time that are really the same place, but we'll get a monitoring of that. And on top of that, we're going to put our own specific masks mandatory policy in as of next week. So from next week, most of you are already, and I think it's pretty much self-explanatory and sensible, but we're just going to please insist that everybody here wears a mask when they come in and just observes that sort of common sense social distancing. It's starting tonight, but our primary policy, primary method, or what potentially could become our primary method of running these Wednesday evenings will be a live stream. So every one of these talks, if it's a talk, or judgings, if it's a judging, is going to be live streamed. So those of you who can't come, or those of you who are a little uncomfortable coming out, as the numbers get a little higher, you will still be able to continue to participate, to see your images judged, etc., etc. What, again, we imagine is likely to happen as we get higher into the numbers, there'll be a few people who feel a little less comfortable about coming along, so we might just have half a dozen people here on a Wednesday night, but that we'll still broadcast things out of here, we'll still run the meeting here, so who wants to come can come, and the live stream will be set up here once we've got the gear sorted out. This is the easiest place to run the live stream, so that's the process going forward. Hopefully that'll get us through the next 2 or 3 months, over the top of the wave and out the other side, and by autumn, maybe, world will come back to sort of normal and we'll be away and running. Fingers and toes crossed is pretty much how we stand with that. Okay, that's all the preamble stuff we want to talk about. I'm going to move on to talk about Ron. Ron is a speaker that does not need any introduction at all. We all know him really well, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. I looked at the database that we have of the membership, and I'm pretty sure this is wrong, but it says he's been a member for 53 years.
Correct.
I did some math. That means he must have been 10 or 11 when he joined, so I found that hard to believe. I apologise if there's been a mistake there.
I think I was 15.
53 years, a pretty impressive number. I remember when I first came, we didn't tend to explain too much about how all these letters, what they all mean, and I went for probably 6 or 8 months before I understood any of it, but every time Ron achieved an award, I ended up thinking he's a man of many letters, so I had a group of people who I classified as MMLs when I was starting, but if you look at Ron's many letters, let's talk about them. The first one is on PSNZ. That means he's a life member of the Photographic Society of New Zealand. He achieved that in 2015, and that's no small feat, and that it is commendable in itself. He achieved an FPSNZ in 1977. That was the year I left high school and joined the RNZAF, and he's getting a fellowship. I just kind of feel behind the 8 ball here. FAPS, he's also got a fellowship with Australia, an associateship with the Royal Photographic Society, and an AFAIP, which is an artist of the Federation of International Photographic Artists. That's pretty impressive array of man of many letters. Ron has always made interesting photographs and challenging work through all the stuff. If you look back at some of the early work that he's done, so you see some of his dark room work where he's been doing solarized images or bas relief or all these sort of things. Once again, things that I dabbled with at high school, but Ron had them mastered at the same time. So he's been doing this sort of thing for a long time, and he's been giving talks for years and years and years. If you look at some of his back catalogues, they're pretty much the same as what we're going to hear tonight. I found one which was creative experimental photography. Not too different to what we're talking about tonight, just a different era. And we also had photographic realities and fantasies. So again, a whole bunch of talks that I'd love to hear all the way through, but here we are tonight to listen to something new. And the other thing that I would say about Ron is that he continues to produce quality work. And as a really good example of that, he told me tonight that he has just received an FAIP Gold Medal Award for an image that he entered in an international salon in Australia through the Maitland. That, I think, deserves a round of applause for a start before we start. And I'm assured that we're going to see that picture tonight. So I, for one, am very much looking forward to it, and I would invite Ron to join me on the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. What you're seeing tonight is this program is a world first, and those of you who are watching this through the internet, through live broadcasting, welcome. I hope you enjoy this program as well. This would have to be one of the best photographic societies in New Zealand to present to. It is a vibrant society. There is lots of enthusiasm among people. There's lots of variety in the work they do. You've got to really commend yourselves for the tremendous job you do, and thank the committee for the tremendous job they do in keeping this together all the time, particularly through difficult times like we've got now. So it is a great pleasure, and it's always my great pleasure to speak here. Tonight I'm going to speak about various creative photography. In fact, if I press a button here, you'll actually see what I'm talking about. Creative and composite photography is what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to go through all the steps and explain how this works. Please, in general, feel free to ask a question if you want to. I may not see your hand because it's dark, so just shout. If we get too far off beam, I might just close it down and say I'm happy to talk afterwards. I will be here for as long as any member is here. So if anybody wants to talk to me after the program, I'm here. I forgot to tell Joy that. And it's lovely to have Joy here as well. I think the best thing we can do is probably dim those lights because you really don't need to look at me. And we'll start looking at some pictures. One of the first things I want to talk about is my camera defaults. Those of you who've seen a program before from me will have noticed that I've talked about this. Camera defaults, they are my camera defaults. This is not saying this is what you have to do to get good pictures. They're just saying this is what you can achieve. We can dim that light down a little bit more. I think everybody knows who's here now. Firstly, I use a very high quality picture. I use fine JPEGs, but I use the very highest quality of fine JPEGs. Now, some people say, oh, I've compared a mid-range JPEG and I've compared it to a RAW file and it doesn't compare, it's nowhere near as good. You're quite right, it's not. It's not anywhere near as quality, but if you get a fine JPEG, you're then getting a very highly and least compressed image. Further in your camera, you can say to your file reader, please make this image as big as is necessary and write the biggest file possible on the card. Or you can say to the camera, please make sure each file is no bigger than this so I can get this many files on the card. Don't use that option. Use the option that says write as big a file as it is. And then you've got a really high quality image JPEG. You can easily produce an 8-foot by 10-foot print from that. And you can certainly produce anything you will ever want to enter in the top exhibitions in the world or want to have reproduced in the best coffee table books. That quality is there in a fine JPEG. Color balance is another thing you need to look at, and where you set the white balance. The easy option is set it on automatic. The disadvantage of doing that is every time you move your camera direction even 1 inch, the color balance will change. Because there's a little more red in this one. You move it around a little bit more, there's a bit more blue. So it changes all the time, the color balance. You then have 6 pictures of the same subject matter and they're all different colors. So it's better to preset it. The common setting then is to set it on sunlight, assuming it's a sunny day. The disadvantage of sunny is it's quite a cold light. It's about an 8,000 Kelvin, and that gives you a slight bluish tinge on it. People prefer generally warm-coloured images, so I set mine to cloudy, or if I want to be exact, 5,560 Kelvin. And if you set it to very warm or very cloudy or shade, then you'll get an even warmer image. You've got to decide what you like best. I'm not telling you what to do, but you will find most people like warmer coloured images than colder coloured images. The other thing that's very important to remember is you can alter a JPEG afterwards as much as you want. You can make it much bluer, you can make it much warmer, you can make it redder, you can make it greener. You've got full control on a JPEG image, just as you would have on a RAW image. ISO, that's the speed of your film, or how fast, how easy it picks up low light. I did a lot of checking when the digital cameras first came out, and that was in about 2005. And I found I could not see a perceivable difference between 100 ISO and 200 ISO. The advantage of 200 ISO was effectively I had increased every lens in my collection by 1 f-stop. So my 2.8 lens became an f2 lens. My f8 lens became a 5.6 lens. And I didn't have to spend $10,000 on lens upgrades to do that. So that's why I suggest tweak it slightly higher. With the modern cameras, you can quite often go to 800 and not even lose anything. But having said that, it's always still best to keep it at the lower end. Okay, aperture priority, that is what your camera is set on. I set mine always by aperture rather than shutter speed. I set it as close as possible to wide open on the lens. If you've got a 5.6 lens, set it on 5.6. If you've got an f8 lens, set it on f8. If you've got a 2.8 lens, set it on 2.8. You may want to set half a stop higher than that. There's a little bit of sharpness gain that you may get. But the thing is, that's not what you take all your photographs on. It's just if you suddenly grab your camera, it's on a low aperture, shallow depth of field. Why is that important? Your eye, when you look at someone, focuses immediately on the person. And if somebody says, "Did you see that tree in the background?" Before you finish saying that, your eye is already refocused on the tree. If you take pictures and you show them to people with out-of-focus backgrounds, they say, "Wow, you're a stunning photographer. I've never seen anyone approach subject matter like that." Because they themselves have never seen that, because their eye is always constantly refocused. And when they see something with an out-of-focus background, they say, "Wow, this really lifts that person. It makes it stand out." And that's why I use that as a default. That doesn't mean I don't shoot at f16 or f11, whatever is required, but my default is wide open. And the other thing I do is underexpose by about half a stop. Now, digital photography is similar to color slide photography. It is not similar to negative photography. It's similar to color slide photography. So in color slide photography, you never overexpose the highlights. You always exposed so that the highlights did not burn out. And then your darks go darker, but that doesn't matter because you can bring up your darks. You can bring up that shadow detail. White overexposed is overexposed is overexposed, and it doesn't matter whether you shoot raw JPEG or anything else. When it's overexposed, it's overexposed. You cannot get it back. And don't let anyone tell you anything different. There are tricks to make it look like you get it back. Like if you turn the white to a grey, it doesn't look like it's so overexposed. It's still overexposed. So underexpose slightly. Remember, later on you can always lighten up the image. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. But you can never retain or recall a white that is overexposed and that is lost. Okay, that's a lot of technical stuff. Let's have a look at a few more bits and pieces. Monopod versus tripod. People again have heard me speak about this. Now, question. Why would you ever use a tripod with a 28mm lens when you're shooting at 1,000th of a second? You could drop the camera from the roof to the ground, and at 1,000th of a second on a 28mm lens, it will still be sharp while the camera is falling. So you use a tripod when you've got a really slow shutter speed. That's what it's for. It's handy for composition, but it's to stabilize the camera. Now, a monopod will stabilize the camera remarkably well, about 3 stops or 3 shutter speeds, provided you hold it a wee bit still. That is, don't wave it all over the place. But it stabilizes it a lot more than not having a stabilizer on it. With a lens having a stabilizer in it too, that stabilizes it more. A stabilizer lens on a monopod works fine. If you put a stabilizer lens on a tripod, you've got to turn the stabilizer off, because the stabilizer is held in place by the lens being on a tripod, so it's desperately moving all the lenses around trying to make it sharp, and the result is you get blurred pictures. If you have the stabilizer on most lenses and it's on a tripod, you will mostly get blurred pictures. And I know 1 or 2 CPS members who actually fell into that trap in the early days. On a monopod, you don't need to worry about that. Plus, you've only got 1 leg instead of 3. It means it's 1/3 of the weight and 1/3 of the price. And it's a quick change of position. You're working with a monopod here. Over here, you see something over there, right, boom, and you're ready. You try doing that with a tripod. Pull up the 3 legs, put it over here, pull the 3 legs out again, check that the column is right. You've lost the subject matter by then. So Monopod has some real advantages. That picture you see there was taken at a quarter of a second from across the road on a monopod in the evening. And I have looked at that at 1000% magnification, and I can assure you it is razor sharp everywhere. So it does give you good quality pictures. Okay, now this is important to read. Now, SHIT is my own made-up acronym. Solving hardships in technology. Right, we've done all that now. Okay, so let's look at actual pictures, because that's sort of what you came for. Now, I wanted to show you a picture that I'd only taken a month ago. And this picture is, for those of you who do not recognize him, the gentleman with the hat on is a guy called Geoffrey Cloak, based in Timaru, with his wife Marty, and the other person, of course, is Joy. Now you're going to say, this is not creative photography. This is snapshot photography. Wrong. This is very creative. What is creative photography? Creative photography is when you start thinking about what you're trying to achieve in your photograph and then going about the methodology to get the result of what you are trying to achieve. What was I trying to achieve? I wanted interaction between the viewer and the 3 people photographed. So I didn't want them looking at each other. I wanted them to look straight at the camera. That was a creative decision made. I wanted to include the board game to show we were playing board games. It was New Year's Day after all. I wanted to show the food. I wanted to show that we were all having a good drink. You do that on New Year's Day. I wanted to show that I was photographing these people in the back garden of their own home. So I want to make sure I included the house. So I combined all those creative ideas and produced it to give this picture, which was actually very carefully thought out. Now, this is not meaning that it is going to win a competition. In fact, I can assure you that it will get thrown out of most competitions. It doesn't mean it's creative, and it doesn't mean either that just because you're creative, you're going to win awards. The two things don't necessarily correlate. Creative is thinking about how to improve the picture you've got and how to present it in the story you're trying to tell. Now, this picture was taken about 4 days later. Yes, it was taken on about the 4th of January. By that time, Joy had flew the coop. She was already up in Kaiteri. I was sitting in the back garden, and I was really pleased with myself because I'd just mown the lawns, and I'd just put fertilizer all over the lawns, which is why they're nice and green, and I was sitting reading a book. And I thought, actually, I've never taken a picture of our backyard. So I went back inside and I started creatively thinking, how do I do this? Well, start with getting a 10mm lens so you can get the backyard in as well as the side yard in. And then let's see what angle and height it should be. And I got it at this height because I thought that way you can't really see the other houses around it. So if I'm sitting down on a chair in my back garden, it's quite private. People can't see me. That I wanted to show. I wanted to lead into the house, so I waited till all the shadows were all pointing at the house. Creative interpretation with that. Again, lots of creative things I put together, but as creative photography, it's not what you'd recognize as a creative picture. So I then thought, right, let's see what do the experts think about creative photography. And Peter Gray, the psychologist, is really, really good. And I thought he's made a really good point. You can't really teach creativity. And there ends my program. Okay, probably you wanted more. Okay, so let's start talking about creative. I can't teach it. I can give you some guides as to how to look at your images to start doing some things. So I'm going to talk about creativity for about half an hour in camera and using thought power, because that's what it's about, thinking. Now that already means that half the people in New Zealand can't actually do creative photography, but it doesn't apply to anybody in this room. Okay, you need to think about what you're doing. Then I'm going to talk about composites, and they can be done in the computer, and we'll talk about using Photoshop. which is probably the premium product, or GIMP, which is the free version. You can download GIMP at no charge, and it does a lot of the Photoshop things. And you can use Lightroom and all sorts of other products. We'll come back to that when I get to that section. Let's have a look at in-camera creativity. So, how do you become creative? When you're out, you're walking around, you only want to do stuff you can do in camera. You really don't want to do much more than perhaps a little bit of levels and curves on the computer. You just want to take the picture. So the creativity comes about the viewpoint. And think of a viewpoint that is different to the usual viewpoint. Unless, of course, you're particularly wanting to record a traditional viewpoint, as I did with Jeff and Marty. Look at the composition. Where do you want the people? Where do you want the rocks, the trees, the sun? Think about that. And then start interpreting what you see to create the image you're trying to create. Because I can go down the main street in Christchurch, Colombo Street, and I can show you how fabulous a city Christchurch is. Or I can walk down Colombo Street and show you what a dirty, filthy, horrible place it is, and you would never want to come anywhere near Christchurch. Because as the photographer, it's your interpretation and what you're trying to say that ends up with the final photograph. What you need to know is, how do you do the different things? And practice is how you do it. But these are some starting points. What is the message you're trying to say? And then you can enhance those effects by using depth of field. Sometimes a big depth of field where everything's sharp, sometimes a shallow one where hardly anything is sharp. And lighting is the biggest thing. Don't forget, photography is drawing with light. So lighting makes a huge difference. If you've come through photography through a computer background, lighting will never have paid much of a point to you when you were thinking about photography. Now that you've come through that system and you're there, start looking at the light. Start looking at how it plays with the insects as they crawl on leaves. Start looking at it just as children are playing. When there's a football game on, when there's a mountain you're looking at or a lake you're looking at, look at the lighting. Okay, so now we're getting into taking photographs. This photograph I took in Picton a couple of years ago, and if you look at this closely, you'll see this is not a snapshot of a guy looking at a sign. I spent some real time actually composing that picture, that lovely square, and then that rectangular piece with a Guinness pyramid on it. And once I had composed what I wanted, I waited. And this guy just happened to be coming along. He happened to be wearing a black top. He happened to be having white hair, which matched what he was reading. And I just waited till he was in position. And so I've got a creative interpretation rather than just a plain record. Because why is it creative? Because of the composition of the red squares on the black. Now, this is the picture which 2 days ago won the FIAP gold medal for Best Photo Travel. This picture is also the one which last year won the PSA gold medal. Last year was in Queensland, this year was in New South Wales. And it's really great because there's two sets of different judges, and to have two sets of judges both thinking this was the best picture in the show was great. This is the picture as it was taken. Now, I spent some time taking this. 2 or 3 hours I was in this area, watching them throw the flags. I wanted the flags in the air. I wanted the flags to get the sunlight in there. I wanted them to be holding flags. I wanted to show the background audience, and I wanted to show the trumpeters and everything else. Now, you can tweak it afterwards. If it's photojournalism or photo travel, you cannot remove anything from the picture. You cannot add anything to the picture. That's a written law. You just can't do that. You can be dishonest and try and get away with it, but you're not allowed to do that. However, you can tweak colours. Now, look at what happens when I just tweak levels and curves. See the difference? Just go back. And all I've done is played around with 2 sliders, levels and curves. I thought there's no point in showing you a computer screen of what those level sliders are. You know they're there. And if I did do that, this program would take 4 hours. But levels and curves are the first 2 sliders that are in Photoshop and most other programs. GIMP's much the same. And you just adjust that to increase the lightness or the darkness or increase the contrast. If it's in curves, you can actually adjust the S-curve so you can make the lighter areas lighter, the darker areas darker, and the middle stays in the middle. The best way to learn how to do it is just do it. Just get a picture, any JPEG image that you've got, and just slide the sliders. And you'll be amazed at what you can get. And exaggerate. Just go way too far over one side. And then tweak backwards. And you'll be amazed at what difference you can make to a picture. Here's another example of something closer to home. This is just north of Kaikoura. This was taken last year. And I was doing a workshop in Marlborough. And so it was late afternoon when I got here. And I just saw all the compositional elements. I thought the tree is in the right place. The fence line is leading down. There's lovely dappled lighting on the hills. There's texture, there's mood. And then I tweaked it in Photoshop, and a slight tweak gave me that. What a difference. All I did was play with 2 sliders. I didn't add anything, didn't subtract anything, just played with 2 sliders. Just to remind you again to go back. That's where we were. And that's what we changed it to. Okay. So, having learnt that I do tweak from time to time, let's look at the straight images and how about being creative, and a lot of it's about viewpoint. This is a loch called Loch Cameron. It's very near Twizel, the back of Twizel. It's not very big, it's probably twice the size of this room. And this day, the autumn colour was stunning, and I used a wide-angle lens, got very close to the autumn colours. It made me see the whole of the trees, a bland sky, but the blue, such a wonderful contrast with the gold. So by just taking very simple creative ideas, wide-angle lens, getting close to some subject matter, because I honestly was probably only about 2 feet away from the tree, the big one. And suddenly you get a dramatic picture that has real effect. And it has had a 100% reject rate in competition. But it's still a great photo, and it does use creative ideas. Similar technique, wide-angle lens, this time it's in the Mackenzie country. I saw this cloud as I was driving along, and I stopped somewhere where I could see some turf in the foreground. And then I just got down really low with the wide-angle lens and basically matched the line of the grass with the line of the clouds. And so it became a creative interpretation of the scene I'd seen. Whereas if I'd stood up the normal way, all you'd do is get a picture of some clouds and a bit of mountains. But it was just by altering that viewpoint, it got creative. Now, last year, in about the second to last competition, I had a picture in there which was of some dairy cows, and it was nicely lit. And one of the members came up to me, she said, "Oh, where did you take that?" And I said, "Well, actually, that was taken at the back of Fairley." I said, "No, it's a really nice place to be." And then I said to her, "Actually, I'm supposed to go to a meeting in Ashburton, but the meeting in Ashburton's cancelled. So it's actually only a little bit longer to drive to Fairley. So I might do that this weekend. I might just go to Fairley, and just as a day trip." And of course, day trips aren't expensive because you don't have to pay for accommodation and you don't have to pay for 3 meals. And I went to my usual bits of road at the back of Fairley, and suddenly this cloud was just starting to form. And so you got this lovely landscape in the foreground and this fabulous cloud. And I thought, yes, nailed it. It's by seeing something that works, getting your exposure right, then balancing your composition. I walked up and down that piece of road maybe 500 metres each way to say, where's the best position to have the cloud relative to the landscape? Again, it's about thinking what you're trying to achieve. And what I've done here now is, with a couple of images, I've actually shown you in the small size what the image looks like before I do anything to it, and what it looks like after you tweak the levels and curves a little bit. And you warm up that lighting, you make the shadows a little bit more dramatic. And you can see from that, you get quite an increase in drama in your pictures just by tweaking levels and curves. Sometimes you might want to warm the image up a little bit. You can do that. It's very easy to warm an image or cool it down. You just use the appropriate sliders for doing that as well. And they're very easy to work. Similar image, this was actually taken when I was leading the field trip to Castle Hill at the convention. The top picture is as it was, and then the bottom picture shows what I've added to it, just a little more drama in the clouds, a little bit more warmth and texture in the rocks, and made it stand out. So from a very ordinary picture, a little bit creative application, and you end up with a more creative picture. This one, much further afield, this is in Palouse, which is Washington State. And the top one is As It Was, and the bottom one is As I Played Round With It. Now, apart from the colour being warmed up a little bit, one of the neat things you can do is you can also sharpen your image. Now, if you go carte blanche and you just say sharpen the image 88% or 95 or 150%, you have the risk of getting halos in a lot of areas where you don't want them. What you can do on an image like this one is you can just create a little brush and just sharpen the man in the seat. And maybe some of those wires that are running from him. So now his wires and he looks very, very sharp because you've sharpened it afterwards. Because if you now look closely at that picture and look at the houses in the background, let me just point that out, these houses here, you'll notice they're all blurred. Why are they blurred? Because this guy was moving at quite a speed. And so the houses got blurred. And so by sharpening him, you increase that effect. And it's something, again, largely this is all done in camera. It's just tweaking the final bits. It's not manipulation as such. It's just tweaking the sharpening. Okay, Viewpoint, I said, was very important to get creative. So this is taken near Cromwell, obviously in autumn. And I thought, this has often been taken, want to do this differently. So I lay on the ground, and my camera was approximately about 50 centimeters above the ground. And I used a wide-angle lens, and I focused on the leaves in the foreground, and then used a huge depth of field. So you've got a relatively sharp thing. The important thing to get sharp was the leaves in the foreground, because nobody actually notices that the trees right at the back are not quite sharp. It's not important. It's not about that. But it's that totally different viewpoint that has given you that creative interpretation. This is totally different. This is in White Sands in New Mexico. It's one of my favorite haunts, and we've stayed in a motel just near White Sands, perhaps 5-10 minutes drive. I go really early in the morning. In this case, the gates open at 7. I was waiting at 5 to 7 to go through the gates. One of the neat things about going early in the morning, during the night, the wind blows all the footprints away. So you have magic area with no footprints in it of sand. And then the lighting was good, generous to me, lighting up this bit of grass and then having this dark grey sky as the background. And that's been a very successful picture here at CPS and overseas as well. Because of the drama you've got through the colour of the light, and it was just a matter of being there. Fairly wide angle lens, so I was concentrating on the plant. Now, this is a picture of a duck, or a duckling. And this duckling is with its dad. By the way, it's a dad, it's not a mum. Now, most people, when they take pictures like that, they show dad and then they show the duckling. And I thought, no, I want to show the duckling. Dad's head isn't needed at all. So chop that off and focus on what's important. And suddenly you're creating a new picture, because most people don't look at pictures of father and son ducklings like this. But by just changing a different approach, by cutting off the head, you've suddenly created a totally different focus, and people will look at that twice. Flamingos. Now this is a straight photograph taken with an 18 to 200 zoom lens, taken in France, where there were a lot of flamingos. But I then liked that, and then I wanted to soften the background. And so, and I can't enter this in natural history. And I just worked and worked backwards and forwards with brushes, very faint blue, the blue picked out of the picture itself, so as to make that background, those legs in the background, these ones here, I did my best to almost wash them out and fill in the highlight areas, just make them grey so you could see there are other birds there, but they weren't distracting from the main subject matter. And it's those little things you can do afterwards that do help you. Still a straight photograph, it's certainly not a composite, but it does help improve your picture. This, virtually nothing done. We stayed on this island, it's Procedure Island. It's about a half hour by boat out of Naples. The island is 5 square miles, has a population of 100,000 people. And we spent about 10 days there. Joy came up with this idea. She saw a cooking program over there, and she said, I think we should go to this island. And I looked at the pictures. I said, Joy, I think that's a great idea. Let's find out how to do that. Well, no travel agent had ever heard of it, but we finally educated them, and we finally got the place. And we were actually staying just in here. So we had a view of this, and we just walked around. It was about a half-hour walk, and then looked back. But you had this most incredible sky. The background hills you see, by the way, are Italy. They're not the same island. And so just by being at the right time, sometimes you help and get a creative picture, and then I focus the whole picture around the cloud. Much closer to home, this was taken a few months ago. This is a picture of Mount Cook. If you look really hard, you can find it. But I wanted to do something different. So again, wide-angle lens, got down really low, and there was a very small tarn, a tarn probably a quarter the size of this room, and I got really close to it. I mean, I was literally only a metre away from it. And concentrated that, and then looked at the reflections I was getting from the clouds, and walked around and adjusted till I got all about that. But Mount Cook's still in there. The clouds were now big enough to fill most of the sky, because I had only, the center line was in the top quarter of the picture. So by not having it in the middle, you've pulled everybody into the picture. Everybody gets pulled into that picture. It's natural. You've got the lines. They're all going, they're converging to where Mount Cook is. So it pulls everyone in. And that's what you're trying to do, is pull people's eye into your photographs. Sometimes you take horizontal pictures, as I did here. And this is, of course, just near Collingwood. And taken about 8:30 in the morning. But I decided in the end that I liked it better as a vertical picture. And so I cropped it as a vertical. Remember, your pictures are huge. You know, they're 5,000 to 10,000 pixels wide. A crop works fine. And I decided that was actually going to be my Christmas card. And because of that, I could actually put my signature on it, which I've done right in the bottom corner. Helen McLeod showed me how to make a digital signature. And so I did that. You can't do that in competition, but you can certainly do it for your own work. And I thought, right, I even got the foam to get itself worked around my signature. So there are little things you can do like that that add creativity. It's the same as that story I sometimes talk about, have a red duck in your picture. Okay, if you're doing straight photography and you're doing something like motor racing, you can still be very creative in how you do it. This is in the Ronnie Moore place just by West Melton. The beauty of that is everybody stands about this high relative to the racetrack. So A, you're safe, and B, you look down on the bikes, and that gives you a nice view. It's then just a matter of getting composition. And I just waited. I'd been watching these bikes, and I thought if I can get the two green ones together in the picture and then dust behind it, that's going to have some atmosphere, that's going to have some composition. And that's exactly what you got by that creative interpretation rather than just a record of the racing. And that has done quite well in competition. In a similar vein, this one too, this time, same raceway, but this time with two-wheelers. And I got the two blue guys together, almost at the same angle, and then in contrast, the other one in black. So you had this balanced composition and a feel of ride through. The dust gave the atmosphere, the bright lighting, the sunlight, it was probably taken at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, made the picture really just stand out. So sometimes you're just riding along the road, and this is near Quinnies Bush. Many of you will know that. It's on the road from Nelson back to Christchurch, near the Nelson end. And that church is a really lovely church. And it's been very well restored thanks to Quinnies people. But it's fairly well a record as it is. And I thought, how do we make this more creative? And I knew I was doing this program by the time I took this picture. I thought, how do I make this more creative? How do I make this interesting? And so I started walking around. And I found a headstone. I thought, right, now I've got a name. Now I've got a date. I've got a tree that I've managed to fit in there as well. So now you're telling a whole story. And so you've made the picture far more interesting than just recording a picture of a church. And those are the sort of things, if you do that during the year when you think about your photographs, go back to your existing photos. You'll be amazed how much you've got that is really good, that will be aided so much just by cropping and recomposing slightly. Otherwise, go out for the weekend, go over to Governor's Bay, or go over to Lake Hood at Ashburton, or go up to Hamner Springs, somewhere handy, and just apply some of these rules and guidelines. Once again here, this time we're Lake McGregor, and so I got the silhouette of the tree close to my lens and let that fill all the sky to lead me into the autumn colours on the side of the bank. It's just by walking around and say, how can I best do that? Otherwise you'd have this huge blank sky with a couple of trees on either side. But by making the tree fill the sky, I've creatively filled that area, and I've led you into a landscape and made the other tree the focal point of interest. Totally different, dramatic. And drama is, of course, a great way to start. That will catch people's attention. What you've then got to do is make the best of what you got. And this is at St. Bathans. The lake would, in fact, the lake everyone photographs would be on your right-hand side. But I was focusing on these clouds because of the drama and the texture and the rock, and I just took that with a wide-angle lens, and you've got some drama. You've got sky, which is almost totally black, but you've still got sunlight on the trees in the foreground. So you have to be opportunist as well. That's one of the great advantages of having your camera on a preset, because you know that you can pick it up and you know everything is ready to run. Sometimes you just want to focus on a little thing. Joy and I were invited to a function that was on in Christchurch, and we went to it and went to the main stand, and our friend who was manning that stand and talked to him for a while. Then we started walking around. I was walking around and I saw this face painting going on, and I thought, this little girl is quite earnest about what she's receiving. And then the face painter did absolute magic. She put one hand on top of the girl's head and then had the other hand doing the painting. So you actually had hands-on face painting. And that's made a very strong composition. The girl is not looking at you this time. You're actually you're seeing something that is happening. And that picture has done well in competition and has done well in internationals as well. Totally different location. This is Chicago. And these three kids, this is not a setup. They were just playing with water and afternoon tea. And I just waited and I looked at all the beautiful reflections. I love the color contrast of the skin colors and the clothing colors. And I thought, what a real lovely storytelling picture this is, of togetherness of three kids just really enjoying an afternoon. And again, walked around and got my composition, checked my reflections all the time, walked around to get reflections which were not distracting but showed what was going on, and then just waited. And sometimes you've got to wait 10 minutes, that the cups are in the right place, they're holding out their cups, they're pouring it into the teapot or whatever you want to. But it suddenly becomes a story rather than a record photo. And this photo was taken at the National Convention in Wellington a couple of years back. So the model was set up, it was a modelling session. Those who went paid to have the models there, and the models were very good and they knew what they were doing. And these were doing very much pin-up girls. This was the aim of the modelling session. And I thought, she just did this quite naturally. I'd seen her do it a couple of times and I said, I want you to do that, but slightly different. I want this, this and this. And she said, fine, I'll do that. Now what has made the picture is I then made a red and white border around that picture. The red is the colour of her dress. I know it is because I picked it with my picker and said, produce that colour red. And then I picked the picker on the white and said, produce this colour white. Because you do know there are at least 532 different shades of white. Right, so you've got to get the right shade. Okay, and then I just put it like that. And because of the framing, it's done quite nicely in competition. So it's those little things that make it different. It's a creative approach. Very simple creative approach. I mean, quite honestly, the framing did not take long because you're just drawing some straight lines. Sometimes you do lots of other tweaking with a straight image. And I wanted to make this look really rusty. I was with a well-known photographer called Roger Brownsey when I photographed this. And we just wandered around, and I thought, yep, I just like this. It's a picture I've never actually entered in competition, but I just like it as a picture. And taken on the same day, again with Roger Brownsey. This is a picture, I took it myself. Roger did not take it. I set the camera up. And then I wanted to make it look grungy. Once Was My Home, it's called. And you can see I'm pretty fed up with the fact that it's not my home now. And I posed to give that look because I knew what I was going to do to it. And so I balanced the composition. I made sure I was well placed in the frame. And then I toned down all the things around the edges, particularly that were distracting, and focused the light on the areas that were important, the stove and me. And that picture has represented CPS in one of the interclub competitions that actually won. So you can do these things with the thought that when you're taking the picture, have an idea of what you're going to do with it afterwards. And again, it's just tweaking rather than major stuff. Something totally different. This really caught my eye. This woman was standing there with this crucifix for hours. And I just thought, this is so incongruous. There's a hot dog stand behind her, and there's a church behind her, and there's a woman feeding a pigeon. Out of focus because I used the shallow depth of field. And I thought, there's a story here. The judge didn't understand the story, but that's okay. That was a faulty judge. I still like the picture. But there was a reason for it. It wasn't just a snapshot. I was trying to tell the story. Who does not know which city this was taken in? Right, I figured you do. So this guy was looking at New York and then decided to look at something. He was not posed. He was standing there, and he swung his binoculars around and pointed that way. And I thought, wow, perfect. Wearing a red shirt against a blue-colored background. He's got this thing, and I just loved it as a picture. Really good storytelling picture, even though you can't see his eyes. Tells you all about the story. Sometimes you just got to wait for those opportunities and be creative about them when they happen. This, again, he was sitting there smoking. This is in San Francisco. And I saw the background, and I thought, this is just an awesome background. And I just slowly walked around until I got it right in his background. Because when I originally saw it, it was right to the side of me on the right, and he was on the left. And then I thought, I'll just carry on walking around. I spent maybe 15 minutes getting this, and then just waited till he lifted his cigarette up. And again, this has been a very successful picture, because it's a contrast. But the painting is telling you all about the feeling of what's going on. And so it tells a story. Much closer to home, this is if you travel around Mount Egmont and you go around the coast road. This was taken about 4 or 5 months ago. And I just wanted to get the history of New Zealand as it was. This is obviously no longer in use. And so I wanted to get a very factual recording. I didn't want something creative and dramatic. So I made sure I was right in front of it. And then I even altered the converging verticals in Photoshop afterwards to make sure everything was straight edged. And I thought it just records a time past of the general storekeeper. In total contrast, this is the coastline of Italy, the Amalfi Coast, and just looking down there, and I just saw all the patterns, and I thought, this is going to be great. And I just waited till all the swimmers were in the right place. And I obviously from there couldn't direct them, so I just had to wait. And just waited, and I thought, this is about right. And then with a little bit of judicious cropping after I'd taken the picture, came up with this image, which tells a story. If nothing else, it's a great pattern story. Closer to home again, this is a couple of trees just out of Waimate on the way back to Timaru. And I was driving to, in fact, go to Jeff and Marty's place for dinner. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening in the winter. And I just loved the coldness and the fog that was there. I just thought that was really neat. And it just captured that atmosphere. Definitely taken on a monopod because it was a slow shutter speed. And sometimes it's just the little things. This is back actually on Procedure Island. And I thought, this captures actually the island. You've got the reds that are in there contrasting against the blue painted wall and the shadows and the lines. Look at the lines, how they all compose together well. I spent quite some time composing this. So that's where the creativity came in. It was composing it and then taking the picture and then having a good depth of field to make sure it was all sharp. Lovely texture from the shadows. So you can get creative pictures out of the most unexpected opportunities. Another unexpected opportunity has been quite a successful picture. It's actually the underground walking tunnel between two of the galleries in Houston, Texas. And you walk through this and it looks like that. The white markings are actually there, and I just took photographs of people walking through. And I handheld it. So I've got quite a few pictures of very blurred people, but one or two were sharp enough to use. And that picture has done very well in international exhibitions, as well as being reproduced in New Zealand Camera a couple of years back. Sometimes, I knew it was coming up. This is in the glassworks in Ireland. So we knew where we were going to, and I thought there was going to be low lighting. I adjusted my camera settings for that, for tungsten lighting, for slow shutter speeds, etc., etc. And then when I saw the guy, I thought, right, this is it. Let the group go on. They're just being told how they make glass. I don't need to know this. I need a good picture. And I just waited till he was totally immersed in what he was doing and totally looking at what he was doing. The lighting was good. Said, whammo, this is the picture. And sometimes you see things like that and you think, wow, this is great, artist. And I use that shallow depth of field idea. But think about it too when you do these things. It's an artist. What do you associate with an artist? A brush. So make sure you can see the brush, because that tells half the story. And half the time I couldn't see her brush, so I just waited till I could see her brush. I wasn't interested in seeing her face. I knew our composition was right because I had the nice backlighting on her hair, the out of focus background. You could tell she was painting. Wait till the brush was in place and whammo, there's your picture. Much closer to home, driving through the Forgotten Road in the middle of the North Island. Strathglen, I think it is. And looking down and look at the lovely shadows created by all the trees, and then the contrast between the appeared to be very mown fields compared to the rougher grazing lands. And it just made a nice contrast and made a composition. So again, it's how I saw it. And that's what it's about. It's about how you see it. That's when it becomes creative. When it's your interpretation, that's you being creative. Or maybe it's the first light on the trees in Twizel. Or maybe it's the first light in Tuscany. It's taken at about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. We were very lucky. We had an apartment for 6 weeks, and I could look out the window at 4 o'clock in the morning, say, yep, today's going to be a good day. I got dressed, left Joy in bed, and then vamoosed for 2 or 3 hours. And after a few days, you got to know all the places to go to. And it was quite amusing because at the beginning, I was one of the only photographers. Towards the latter part of those 6 weeks, there were lots of photo tours going around as well. And I was always quite amused because they'd be there for an hour and a half taking their photos. And I thought, well, actually, the building's not moving a lot. The light's right. There's 5 other opportunities today. I'm going to take 5 other pictures. They stayed in the one place. But I did get to know 1 or 2 of them quite well, and those of you who know me know that I'm quite keen on liqueurs. Well, we even had a liqueur bar in our little villa in Italy, and we invited a few photographers back for a liqueur, and they joined us. But this, going back to the picture, this is something that is quite creative, but it's traditional creative. It's the composition is right, it's the recession in the background, it's the lighting on the building, it's about viewpoint, it's about lighting, but it's not a wham, bam, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. It's just very traditional, done very, very well. Another relatively traditional, this is the archway monuments. This archway gets that light for approximately 4 minutes a day at about 5:30 a.m. And it's hard to photograph because I wanted to photograph with a wide-angle lens. Now, you don't have to think very long. A wide-angle lens means you've got to be real close, which means you get into everybody else's picture. And they don't like that, which is fair enough. And so it was really nice in general, apart from some tourists that were really annoying, which we won't talk about. All of the photographers were respectful of each other. And at one stage I said, could I please walk up close? I've got a wide angle lens, which I bought specially for this archway, and I said, I will be no longer than 30 seconds. They said, sure. And I went in there, bang, bang, and went back. But I'd composed everything beforehand. And we fortunately were staying in a campsite very close by, only about 2 kilometres away. And so we were actually able to go there 3 mornings. And we had pretty good lighting all 3 mornings. But just awesome. Archways is one of the really lovely national parks in the US. Sometimes it's about lighting and some action, and you do that combination. People say, oh, warm lighting, that's nice. Blurred shutter speeds, that's nice. Why not combine some of those things? And the truck was going the opposite way. It makes them look even more blurred. And so again, it's a creative input by doing that. Much closer to home, I took this about the middle of last year. This is Taupo, probably at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I just love these geysers, or these thermal station producing all the steam, and just waited for the patterns and waited for the whole thing. It hangs together rather nicely just by itself. I may well use it one day as a montage, because it's white, so it suits a black silhouette very well. But in its own right, I thought it was worth taking. Rocamadour in France, late lighting, relies so much on the lighting to make this an awesome picture. And one of the islands very close to the island of Procida, just as the sun was setting in the lighthouse. And you know, because this is a sunset shot, so you know this is the end of this segment of the talk. So it was. Now, are you all still with me? Okay, so we've done creative largely in camera. What I now want to talk about is composite photography and the methodology you use about composites. So again, I'm not going to show you any screens of Photoshop and the sliders and what goes there and what goes there. What's more important is, how did we start layering those pictures? How did we start putting that together? So we're using multiple images. Think of an idea and let the ideas evolve. So I will sit in front of a computer and I'll say, I think I'll put this with this. Yeah, that's really good if I drop this bit. Okay, well, let's put this bit in here instead. Well, that's now a really good background. Let's now drop the foreground and change the foreground. So after an hour, I haven't got anything like what I started with. But your mind just moves, and let it move. Let it just drift. And if you're not sure, just save it and do a save as. And I often do that. I'll do a save as, and let's say it's trees. I have save as trees version 1. And then next one will be trees v2. That's the title I put on it, the JPEG title, so you can identify it. You've got to give them all a different number, because otherwise they'll just overwrite. But that way you can always go back. Actually, I think the version I did about 4 versions ago was good. You go back to version 2, and then you carry on with that one. So you can keep doing that. Try and create a message or give an interpretation. Okay, let's have a look. So, and I think we can dim that light again now. Thank you very much. So, I started with this picture. My idea, actually I didn't start with this picture. My idea was to get a cinema photographer of the old days and an old-fashioned movie. And I worked very hard with an old steam train that was running over this lady tied to the track type of concept. Help, help. Somebody's going to run me over. And that didn't work that good. So I started over again. And I got this guy. This guy was mimicking Charlie Chaplin. He was a mime artist in Athens. So I photographed him. And then the background is in actual fact a studio setting in Los Angeles. I then merged those two together, and then I made them look about the same. I made them both grainy, and I thought that looks good. Now, everybody knows if it's an old picture, it's always sepia-toned. That, by the way, is myth. Only a few old pictures are sepia-toned, but everyone automatically thinks old pictures are always sepia-toned. So I'll go with the crowd. So we'll sepia-tone it. And at the same time, I thought I'd better put an edging to the screen. So I thought, okay, I've got my screen sorted. Now I better get in my photographer. And I had another mime artist. It's great photographing mime artists. And by the way, if you photograph mime artists, please make sure you put some money in their bowl. Now, here's the secret. Put the money in the bowl before you take the picture, because then they know you've already got some serious money tied up with this. And they're a lot more cooperative than if you put the money afterwards. They're far more cooperative with $1 before you start than $10 when you're finished. And they will work with you. And honestly, if they're really good, throw some more money in there. It really, to us, is only $1. Okay, so I found this mime artist. He was an incredible mime artist. He was actually painted up. He was totally painted in gold. So that's a straight shot of him, and I've got rid of, obviously, the background. Okay, but we have a problem, don't we? If you know your colours, you've got a gold colour and a gold screen. You haven't got a receding colour. So you need to change those around. Well, we had to stay with the sepia tone movie screen, so we had to change the photographer. We made him silver. And it's called Silver Screen Icons, and that has won awards all over the place. It's a very simple concept, but it just works together. Now, I can talk for hours about how you can brush around those and get the edges fine, and there are various tools that will also help you do that. It's just a matter of practice. I don't do that many, so mostly I just rub out the background around the edges. And I work out how thick the line is on the screen, and normally it's about 5 pixels wide. So I get a rubber which has an edge of 5 pixels. And that way you don't want straight lines. If you just cut it out, it looks like a cutout. You've got to make it look like it's going to be part of the other image. So using a softer brush will do that. And if you want to, if you're working with really difficult things like here, set the brush, the rub out brush, at about 80% or even 60% rather than 100%. Because what it then does is it gives some transparency to the cutout. And when you put that cutout on another background, that background then comes through that transparency and it makes it look like it was really there. That girl was obviously there because you can actually look through the fine threads of her hair and see the background building. And that's how you do it, just simply by altering that brush a little bit from 100% to about 80, 60%, depending on what you want. Not necessary here because there's no fuzzy hair bits. Now, this is a really good quote from Henry Ford, and I'm sure he did not design this quote for photographers. I'm sure it was about business, but it's so applicable to photographers. So for every minute of action, there should be an hour of thought. So think about what you're trying to get. Do some sketches. Do some drawings. Also, what I find often works, if you're not sure what you're going to do, and you've got a master image you're starting to work with, reduce it down to 1,000 pixels wide. It's then a tiny image. It's very easy to alter. All the processes work very quickly. And then when you've got a rough drawing of that, save that as a drawing or whatever you want to do or idea, and then work with the big pictures. It just saves you an awful lot of time. Okay, that is where that opening slide came from. That is not where you would expect to find it. That is Joy and I waiting to see the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican. And that was the last thing we'd expected to see, of course. It's not a particularly religious-looking object. But I thought this has got some potential, so I walked around and took about 15 pictures from every angle I could think of. And I thought, right, there's the nucleus of an idea. I could do a Star Wars thing with that. Not sure. Let's go on. Let's create a background. So I created a sky background out of one of the many sky pictures I have. And then I simply did a reflection of it that basically turned the picture upside down, turn it the other way around, throw some ripples on it through the ripple program that you've got in almost any Photoshop type program. And so we've now got some water and it reflects those clouds. And if you look at the ripples, you'll see it does accurately reflect those clouds. Right, now what we'll do is we'll now throw in the Vatican City. Well, okay, that's good. You've got it from different angles. It's the same ball, and you've got it at different angles, but there's no perspective in here. Okay, let's resize them. Now there's a bit of perspective. There's a bit of depth here. And what I've done is I've then put people on each one, and now I've humanized it as well. And this idea just evolved. This was starting off as going to be a Star Wars. They were going to have laser guns firing at each other with a black background and stars. But this ended up working much nicer, and I like that a lot. And I exhibited this a few times, and it did reasonably okay. And then I looked at it again, I thought, Ron, you idiot, there's something seriously missing. What is seriously missing in this picture? Shadows, that's close enough. There are no reflections on the water. So I thought, well, that's easy. Let's put reflections in. Look at the difference the reflections make. Let's just go back. And suddenly, reflections add depth. So keep thinking about your photographs. What can I do to improve that? What can I do to make it look more natural? So it's obviously artificial, but then make it look as real as possible. And that's the sort of thing you want to work at doing. This was really nice. This is Southland. And Joy and I were staying in a motel in Winton. I was doing some workshops for the Southland Camera Club. And we stayed in Winton for a night. We had a layover day. And I said to Joy, the lighting is looking good. You want to come out with me? She said, no, I'm quite happy, just relax. I said, okay, I'm going to disappear. I'll be gone for an hour or two. And it wasn't very far. It was 20k away. And I thought, this is awesome, but it needs something. Now, what is the best known person in Southland? This guy, of course, Graham Dainty. So I photographed Graham Dainty in his home territory in Tauranga, photographing a boat. And I thought he would look good with those lights from Southland, where he comes from. So I put them together. I thought, achieved. But no, that doesn't work, does it? He's sort of really ruined it, hasn't he? Okay, let's make him a little. That's looking better. Now, when light comes at the end of the day, it's always warm colour. Now, our memory will always tell us it was a really warm coloured night. You know, it was rich gold and orange. Perhaps it wasn't quite like that, but that's your memory. You can do anything with composites. This is artificial stuff. You know, so the world is real however you see it. I believe it should be warmer, so I warmed it up. And now you've got a lovely warm atmosphere there, and you've got the photographer as well. And I love the way his camera strap dangles there. So let's do a similar story. I was photographing oil wells in the US, and I had a specific aim. I was wanting a silhouette of an oil well. Guess what I was going to put in the background? Not hard to guess. I was going to put a setting sun. Does that look realistic? No, not at all. So I worked out very quickly what it was. The problem was, of course, you could see detail that you normally wouldn't. So let's just get rid of it. I let a few little bits of detail come through, but largely none of it did. And that picture has been accepted in nearly every international it's ever been entered in, including Cavalcade, which is an international I've been entering for many years in Canada. And sometimes you do something very creative. This is a really old picture, and it's titled Beware the Ozone. And some of you will have seen it because it's used in the judging panel for PSNZ. Here is how it developed. So I took this picture of a sunset, and I quite like that as it was. I put a bit of a red background in pieces where I thought there should be background. I thought, right, there's my storyboard to start with. And I started playing. And I thought, I've got a really neat picture of a tree, but I want to make it feel like it's been totally hurt by the ozone and all the other horrible things that are happening with climate change and everything else. And I thought, right, I used a technique which gave me a white line around all of that tree. I thought, yeah, that looks like it's been seriously damaged. Or it's got a bad case of hoar frost. And then I thought, well, it's a bit lonely by itself. It needs a second tree. But I toned the second tree down and I made it more grey, so it now looks like it's receding. So now we're starting to build some depth in the picture. And then we did it again. And now you've got real depth. Now, how do you know you've got to beware of something? You know because somebody might be looking. So make sure you stick some eyes in there. Hence, beware the ozone. And that's how the picture was built up. That has won numerous gold medals around the world. Closer to home and closer, this is basically put together in the last year. This is actually the Reno National Vintage Car Museum for America. Really worth going. Joy thought, yeah, we could probably go and spend an hour or two there. We spent nearly all day there. I mean, everything was done up. The sets were all done like picture theatres and garages and everything else. And I thought, right, this is a good background. And then I photographed this absolutely wonderful model at the National Convention this year, or last year. Now, this is my photograph. This is not how the photographer set it up. Once he'd done the setup photos, and I don't like just taking that setup, I then said now to the model, I said, this is what I want to achieve. I want you to bow your head down. I want you to look down to where my hand is. I said, but I want your eyes looking straight at me. And you will see now, no matter where you're sitting in this room, whether you're sitting over there where Ian is, or if you're sitting on the far side of the room, that girl is looking straight at you. Okay, you will make that contact. Right, she is going to go to a car museum. Does that look real? No, not really. I mean, heavens, if it was a picture theatre, it wouldn't have all this white stuff at the top. And if you were so sharp on the girl and her eyelashes, wouldn't the background be out of focus? So let's do that. Let's throw the background out of focus. Did you notice I did that? Just in case you didn't, I'll sharpen it again. Now, watch as I throw it out of focus. See, so suddenly what's happened? She becomes the center of attention. She's the only thing that's sharp. So now we need to put some stars up there. Now, of course, I'm taking this with a wide-angle lens, aren't I, of this girl. The stars will be out of focus, won't they? So make sure you get those bits right. So this is a night sky. I was out with Jeff Cloak photographing this night sky somewhere near Timaru. And then I got that slide and I threw the stars out of focus. So, okay, that's far more authentic looking than we had before with the white rafters. And then now let's tweak the colorings, like it's warm lighting, and let's tone down the sky a little bit more so you just see a few stars. And so now you've got a picture which is back from the past. And so you've built up that compositional image. Now, I've only shown you in all of these the actual pictures I've used. In the process, I've often used many other pictures. I didn't want to show that tonight because it was just going to take forever to do that. This was the starting, and I thought, yes, I've got an idea here. I've got a picture of a gorilla. I think that's going to work. Here's the picture of the gorilla. Yeah, the mist is good. Okay, let's work on this. Okay, the gorilla's in about the right place because he's now looking into the picture. Rules of composition, looking into the picture, got him in the right place. Okay, let's fade off let's rub out a lot of the sharp edges of that photograph. I've now got him by himself, and he's just in the mist. And it's obviously not in the mist because the trees are, way bigger than he is. But I wanted to get that storyline across. And then I further tweaked the gorilla to make him really stand out. Just lifted his contrast a little bit, make him stand out, because he's got bigger contrast now than the background, so the background looks more like it is fading in the background, and it becomes more prominent. And that's been a nice picture. That got accepted to CPS a year or two back. Now, this picture you'll probably have seen. This is the final result. And I thought I'd start with the final result this time to tell you how I got there. This picture is a highly successful picture. It's called Firefighter's Demon. So that's how the picture ended up. The original pictures started this way. These were the firefighters. I had already worked out that these were the places where the girl's eye should be because it's all nicely framed. So I then found a girl and I took a photograph of her. I wasn't worried about the background. That wasn't going to come into the picture at all. But she had the right look for what I wanted to do in this photograph. So I thought, right, the picture is right now. I've got it cropped the way I want to, and I will have cropped it a little bit so it suited and that it fit in the right place. And it's easy to see that because what you can do is you can fade the front image just with the slider, and it will let you see through what is coming through. And then you adjust that as you want to. I then thought, now I want to make it look like she is on fire or near a fire. So look at what I've done to her. Her lips have gone red, her red hair has gone redder, and look at the reflection in her eyes. And that's just using a colour slider. That's where we started. And that's using the colour slider. Now you put that with this, and now she looks like a demon. Because you've put the things together, you've thought about it. It's what Henry Ford said. Spend a lot of time thinking and a little bit of time doing. Now we all know what that is. That's a blood moon. That was photographed on my 750mm lens from my backyard. Straight photograph, genuine photograph, and then enlarged somewhat because I cropped it quite a bit. And I thought, right, this is my background. Now, I had taken a picture in the Chicago Art Gallery many years earlier, and this was the picture I had taken. And it was a statue or a work of art. And I took it at that angle because I wanted the silhouette. And I thought, this is perfect to have a moon behind this. So that's the moon behind it. And you see I've left the floor in. And I want to do that, but I thought this silhouette works really well on that moon. The floor now needs to be coloured as if it's reflecting the moon. So a little bit of tweaking, and I changed the colour of the floor. And so now it looks a natural, straight photograph. And I think that was accepted at CPS last year. It's also been accepted in one or two other places. Then, of course, the triptych came, and I thought, oh, I've got my start already. So let's get the man. We'll forget about blood moon. We'll get rid of the blood. So I washed it very carefully, and so the moon was now clean. And I had the frame around it. And then I thought, what can I do to make this into a triptych? And I thought, why don't I use him, cut him in half, and stick him one half on each side? And that's exactly what I did. Cut them in half, one half each side, put a glow effect on both of them, and then I used that same starry sky that I actually used in the picture of the girl in the car museum. However, the stars are a bit sharper this time, and they're a bit brighter, and that was accepted in the triptych competition last year in Nelson. Okay, I think it's time for me to finish. It's nearly 9:30. Do go and visit the website anytime you want to. It is a free website. There are no advertising on it. It's just for the love of sharing photographs. There are 22 galleries there, and if you feel lazy, click on the gallery and then press slideshow, and you can sit in front of it for 2 hours, and it will change the image about every 5 seconds. And you can just watch the show. When you're sick of that gallery, you go to the next gallery. To do all the galleries probably take you 5 or 6 hours. By that time, you will have forgotten what was in the first gallery, so you can start again. Anyway, it has been an absolute delight to be here and speaking with you. I hope everybody learnt something from it. I've enjoyed being here, and I will be here for as long as necessary tonight if you've got further questions. Or I can take questions from the floor. Ian, what would you prefer? Okay, questions from the floor. Right, that's done. No. Yes. Oh, yes, the Grosseto. It was in Grosseto. It's part of Italy, and it's called flag throwing. There was actually a movie on TV about it a while back.
Beautifully done. Was that a single shot or a burst?
They were all single shots, but I probably took, I don't know, I'm really stingy. I'm still from my film days. I'm stingy with digital files. I may have taken 10, 15 pictures at most. And I probably saved about 6 or 7 of them. Each was one shot. There was no motor drive working when I was doing that. And then I chose which was the best picture. And it's not a composite picture. It's a straight one-shot picture. So it fills all the rules of photo travel, and it fills all the rules also of photojournalism. Okay, any other questions? I'm sure there's a lot of things. I can look at everybody and I can see all their minds churning. As I said, I'm around if you think of something you want to ask. I won't hold up proceedings now because some of you I know will want to get home. As I said, it's been a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. That was just fantastic. I'm exhausted watching it, so I don't know how you feel putting it all together. For me, that was about creativity, but it was more about what goes on in the head of Ron Willems, and I thought was fantastic.
That's a worry.
Take this for a little.
Thank you very much.
Thank you from us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ron.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you again. Round of applause again, please. That brings the program for tonight to an end, but just a couple of notices and what's happening next. First of all, about now we'd normally say, come on through for supper, and we'd get the cups of tea out and people would stay here till they get forced out the door at 11 o'clock at night. But unfortunately, there's been a bit of a disaster in the supper room. You possibly noticed last week that it wasn't available. What's happened is the zip has sprung a leak and had been spouting steam and hot water into the roof space above the kitchen area, and it's caused a bit of a disaster. I was speaking today to the RCC people, who then said they've also had another insurance claim, so it's got underneath the lino. So the supper room's going to be another 2, probably 3 weeks until it's back in action. So it's something we just have to bear with. So unfortunately, no supper tonight, but feel free to wander around and stay here and pick Ron's brains as much as you can. When you get home tonight, make sure you have put in your entry for PI1. Closes tonight, so that needs to be done tonight, and get yourself ready with your prints for print number 1 next week. Next week's presentation is a members presentation. As we said last time, it's a little bit different. It's old, experienced members as opposed to new members, which is what we usually have in that. So come back for next week's members presentation. I think you're going to really enjoy it. I talked last week about getting a few more people involved in some of the jobs that we need to do here, and I'd like to congratulate the fact that people have put their hand up and been part of doing it. So Wayne has been helping Andrew on sound and done a fantastic job of that, so thank you, well done. And Alistair has been helping Alan on projection, so we've already had 2 people join in and get involved. So everybody else who wants to, there's still plenty of slots and things to be done. So that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming. Stay and ask Ron some questions. See you next week.
So I guess that worked.
Thank you for that.
No, it was a pleasure putting it together. It took a while to get the hang of it, of how I was going to do this and make it into a program.
Yeah.
But it worked fine in the end.
It worked really well.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Perfect. And you don't want that, they won't.